Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ahsoka series, the show where everyone can use the Force, everything is made up on the spot, and continuity just doesn't matter. In all seriousness, though, while it might be considered a relatively minor aspect of Ahsoka Season 1, the fact that a non Force sensitive character was so casually retconned into a Force user by simply redefining the nature of the Force itself serves to highlight a much broader issue in Disney's Star Wars productions. Whether it stems from carelessness and inattention to detail, poor planning, a lack of respect for the established canon, or just sheer laziness, Disney's clearly willing to make significant retroactive changes in the Star Wars continuity regardless of the repercussions to the franchise. Sure, retcons serve the purpose of providing writers with more creative freedom than they would have if they were strictly bound to the confines of the established lore, which can translate into exciting and original stories. But there is a trade off of potentially creating major continuity issues or logical inconsistencies with the previously established material. The stories and characters which serve to captivate the initial audiences and build the fan base from the ground up, and for that reason, they must be managed very strategically. But Disney Star Wars is clearly not in the business of playing chess, or even checkers, it seems. Their method seems a lot more comparable to my friends and I the time we played Chinese checkers 9 beers deep and on mushrooms. It can be a lot of fun, but eventually the trip wears off and you realize how much of a fucking mess you've made in the process. So, what ultimately constitutes this mess that's been created in the Ahsoka series? While the full extent of the damage cannot yet be quantified, I'm going to make an effort to break down and highlight some of the logical inconsistencies and continuity issues created by this short sighted retconning of the Force. I'm also going to touch on how it's just fundamentally disrespectful to the respective individuality of some of Star Wars' most iconic characters, and provide an alternative method of retconning Sabine's Force sensitivity that would have been far less detrimental to the overall continuity. So let's get to it. Of course, in historical Star Wars, it's always been clear that while the Force resides and flows through all living things, the ability to harness and wield its power is limited to a relatively few select individuals throughout the galaxy.
The force is strong in my family. My father has it. I have it. And my sister has it.
During the time of the Jedi and the Republic, individuals who exhibited Force sensitive capabilities were recruited into the Jedi Order at an early age to be trained in the ways of the Force and serve as the guardians of peace and justice throughout the galaxy. In The Phantom Menace, the concept of metachlorians was introduced, which served to provide a more quantitative method of determining an individual's Force potential. While the concept of metachlorians was mostly negatively received for how it undermined the mysterious and mystical nature of the Force by making it much more trivial, at least it didn't change the entire game by resetting the rules. In the Ahsoka series, however, the concept of Force sensitivity has been seemingly abandoned, and because the Force resides in all living things, anybody is therefore capable of using it. When Sabine rightfully questions Ahsoka as to why, in this case, everyone in the galaxy doesn't just run around using the Force, we're treated to the following explanation by Ahsoka.
Talent is a factor, but training and focus are what truly defines someone's success. Not everyone can handle the type of discipline it takes to master the ways of the Force.
Right.
When the rationalization is this flimsy, there's plenty of holes to be poked in it, so let's start with arguably the biggest one. This explanation is just not in fundamental alignment with the overall concept of the Force, considering the differing ideologies between the Jedi and the Sith and their respective utilization of the light side and the dark side. It certainly takes a high degree of discipline to become a Jedi, let alone a Jedi Master, but the Sith and other dark side users employ the exact opposite mentality in wielding the Force. The Jedi and light side users operate based on the philosophy of discipline and self control, which guides them to act selflessly in the pursuit of peace in lieu of their own personal ambitions. The Sith and dark side users, on the other hand, are self indulgent. They employ passion and emotion to feed their strength and amplify their powers, which enables them to overcome obstacles in pursuit of their own personal desires. Essentially, the Jedi are outward thinkers, while the Sith alternatively operate with an inward mindset. This concept can be very clearly illustrated by just comparing the respective codes of both the Jedi and the Sith. The Jedi code reads, "There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force." Whereas the Sith code reads, "Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me." Given that the dark side of the Force is fueled by passion and emotion, you could go as far as to make the argument that it is actually an inherently undisciplined practice. And of course, we all know from Yoda's wise words that fear is the path to the dark side, as fear leads to anger, which leads to hatred and suffering. While the dark side is not necessarily stronger than the light side, it is quicker, easier, and more seductive, as anger and aggression flow easily and are quick to join you in a fight. If anyone in the galaxy is in fact capable of using the Force, it seems odd that nobody managed to stumble upon it during the reign of the Galactic Empire, who invoked mass fear across the galaxy as a method of controlling subordinate systems. I can't help but think of Darth Bane, who at a relatively young age and prior to being trained in the dark side, subconsciously used the Force to stop his father's heart, killing the man who had abused and traumatized him relentlessly throughout his childhood in a moment of sheer hatred and anger. During the Imperial era, in a period of such fear and desperation amongst the galaxy's citizens, it seems like these kind of things would happen somewhat regularly if every single person were capable of wielding the Force. Palpatine, of course, was pretty keen on eliminating the entirety of the Jedi through Order 66 to effectively rid the galaxy of Force sensitive individuals. He then continued this work through the Inquisitores, who worked to hunt down any residual Jedi or young Force sensitives born after Order 66 who could pose a potential threat to the Empire. I guess he didn't realize that he would, in fact, have to destroy the entire population of the galaxy to effectively accomplish that task. But just for shits here, let's assume that discipline really is the key to being able to use the Force. As Ahsoka says, not everyone can handle the type of discipline it takes to master the ways of the Force. It goes without saying that the Empire is an autocratic and authoritative military regime, and of course, discipline is a trait rarely found in military personnel. Discipline really has no purpose in military operations, and typically it's the least disciplined individuals that are promoted into positions of leadership. Or wait, no. Wait, yeah, I think I might actually have that backwards. Okay, so now that I've got that straightened out, theoretically, a guy's been promoted to the esteemed rank of Grand Admiral would be considered a highly disciplined individual, you would think. And if his discipline isn't enough to make him be able to wield the Force, maybe such a cunning individual could use his elite military force to capture the Jedi who lives about a 10-minute walk away from his Star Destroyer and leverage his knowledge through advanced interrogation methods. Or better yet, he could simply ask his Force wielding babysitters, aka the Fates, for a little bit of help and guidance.
The thread of destiny demands it, Grand Admiral.
Darling, hold that mortal's thread of life good and tight.
The thread of fate has spoken to us.
Another comes.
I am so sorry that I'm
Late. We knew you would be.
We know everything.
Past, present, and future. Indoor plumbing. It's gonna be big.
I apologize, but I have to take a quick moment to acknowledge how hilariously lazy the writing was in this case. Not only are these supposed Night Sisters reciting lines that sound like they're straight out of fucking Disney's Hercules, the writers didn't even bother to give them original names. They literally just took the names of the three sisters from Greek mythology and changed a couple letters in them. It's fucking Star Wars, and now they're just resorting to blatantly ripping off characters and concepts from Greek mythology as opposed to even attempting to be somewhat original? If that's the case, you're better off just watching the animated Hercules movie because at least it's actually entertaining and full of great characters whose actors provide memorable performances. But I digress. Anyways, it seems like there were a handful of people in close proximity to Thrawn over the 10 years he was stranded on Peridia who both understand the ways of the Force and how to wield it, but I guess the poor guy just can't handle the type of discipline it takes to master the ways of the Force.
You kids are soft. You lack discipline.
Beyond the variety of logical inconsistencies stemming from this retcon to the Force, it also creates a multitude of continuity issues. The Jedi Order, of course, recruited Force sensitive individuals at a very young age to be trained in the ways of the Force and the Jedi arts. As demonstrated in The Phantom Menace, the Jedi could differentiate between Force sensitives and non Force sensitives through a basic trial to test their abilities and by using blood tests to determine metachlorian levels. But in the words of Ahsoka,
Talent is a factor. But training and focus are what truly defines someone's success.
so if that's the case, then why did the Jedi only recruit the most talented individuals who were capable of demonstrating their Force sensitivity at a very early age? Wouldn't it make more sense to test their focus and discipline if that's what really defines their success? Maybe the Jedi could hold a big annual tryout for children from across the galaxy to compete and showcase who is truly the most focused and disciplined. Of course, anyone can use the Force, so it's not like it's the end of the world for those who don't make the cut. Maybe they could go on to join the minor league Jedi Order, or a beer league Jedi Order for the least focused and most undisciplined individuals. Furthermore, if talent really is just a factor, with focus and discipline being far more important in mastering the ways of the Force, then how the fuck do you explain Anakin Skywalker? Anakin was arguably one of the most undisciplined and unfocused Jedi in the entire history of the Order. He was stubborn and disregarded the rules of the Order, taking a wife and forming a romantic relationship that would serve as a major distraction for him. He regularly defied the orders of his superiors, instead choosing to act recklessly and put himself and others in danger. But at the end of the day, he was still the chosen one, and it was his inherently strong connection with the Force that allowed him to wield it with such power. Anakin Skywalker's entire character is essentially the complete antithesis of Ahsoka's whole explanation, and given that Ahsoka was Anakin's apprentice and got to witness this firsthand, she should know better. I've already addressed it to an extent in my last video, but regardless of whether it's malicious in nature or just stemming from sheer incompetence, Disney sure does love to shit all over Anakin Skywalker. Personally, I'd wager that it's just incompetence, as the writers at Disney can't even maintain continuity within their own Star Wars series, let alone deconstruct Anakin's character to the point of intentionally undermining him. So on that note, let's talk about the smoldering dumpster fire that is the Mandalorian series. I personally had to tap out of this series at episode 6 of the third season, otherwise known as the Lizzo episode, which, like, what the fuck? I'm sorry, I have to take another brief moment to digress here and address this. Of course, we were recently treated to South Park's Panderverse special, which focused on the continued trend of forced diversity in Hollywood and Disney content specifically. But this situation goes beyond that to highlight a whole new level of obnoxious hypocrisy. The issue with Lizzo's casting is not because of her race, gender, or weight, as the role she plays isn't just a lazy race or gender swap of an established character. The issue is that Disney chose to put the effort into creating an original character and then proceeded to cast a person entirely incapable of acting in the role. If they really cared that much about diversity and female empowerment, they could have chosen to cast a talented, aspiring woman of color. You know, somebody with actual fucking acting abilities who is genuinely deserving of the role. It could have been a life-changing opportunity for them and kickstarted their career if they had excelled in the performance. But instead, they choose to cast a singer or whatever the fuck she does, but regardless, somebody who they know will deliver an absolutely terrible performance, which will then generate loads of criticism to bring increased attention to the series through toxic online discourse, which serves as free viral marketing these days.
That's bait.
And of course, she checks all of the diversity boxes, so when viewers come to the obvious conclusion that she couldn't act herself out of a wet paper bag, then they can just be labeled as intolerant people whose opinions are irrelevant because of their inherent biases and prejudices. What a fucking slimy thing to do.
Fucking piece of shit.
You fucking deceptive! You vermin! You serpent!
You fucking done yet? You slime ball in the sea of pus! I'll
Once again, I apologize for the digression here. Maybe I still have some unresolved anger stemming from that situation, so it's a good thing we have each other because who can afford therapy these days? Anyways, my understanding is that Moff Gideon was trying to create force sensitive clones of himself. That's why he was after Grogu in season 1, so he could experiment on him and extract blood samples, which he would then use to infuse force sensitivity into his clones. Oh boy. I bet this guy's gonna be really pissed off when he finds out that all of those efforts were entirely pointless. Like, come on, anyone can use the Force. Why didn't he just try being a little bit more disciplined and focusing harder on it?
What an idiot! Oh, what a loser!
It takes a special kind of talent in the writer's room to fuck things up this badly. Less than 8 months since The Mandalorian Season 3 release, and they've already completely undermined the antagonist's master plan through sloppy writing in their new original series. In hindsight, maybe expecting them to maintain continuity with historical Star Wars is just far too much to ask for, given that they aren't even capable of maintaining continuity within their own shows, which take place in the same time period and are releasing almost concurrently.
You're even more stupid than I thought.
It's also pretty wild that Ahsoka so openly states that Sabine's Mandalorian skill set alone will not be enough to defeat their enemy, implying that this is something that only a Jedi would be capable of doing. It's a bit of a slap in the face to the various Mandalorians to have come before her, not to mention the majority of the characters in Disney's other series that is literally titled The Mandalorian. I guess that's why the Mandalorians need to keep Baby Yoda around, though, since they're all so fucking useless in a fight on their own. They couldn't just make the antagonists of that series look like a complete idiot, they also had to completely devalue the protagonists as well. But I guess it's really not that big of a deal though, because whatever portion of that show's audience will remain after season 3 is clearly not returning for the quality of the writing and storytelling.
You want to touch it?
This speaks to a broader issue though, in that the whole concept of certain characters needing to become Force users or Jedi so they can fight back against the forces of evil is just insulting to the respective individuality of so many of Star Wars' most iconic characters. Something that was instrumental in making the original trilogy so exciting and appealing to a wide variety of people. The idea that a group of relatively normal people could band together and collectively rebel and fight back against a massive, evil military force. That together those people, through their actions, could influence positive change and spark progress in the galaxy even when the odds are stacked against them and hope has dwindled. Regardless of who they were, everyone in the rebellion had a role to play in the overall operation, and the certain individuals with more unique skill sets were embraced within the team environment as opposed to being forced into becoming something that they just simply weren't.
There's no mystical energy field controls my destiny. It's all a lot of simple tricks and nonsense.
You would never expect Han Solo and Chewbacca to be the ones to confront Vader and Palpatine during the Battle of Endor, but their respective backgrounds and extensive smuggling experience was instrumental in getting them past the Imperial forces to take down the shield generators. Lando Calrissian was not only a handy pilot who knew his way around the Millennium Falcon, but he was also a natural leader as demonstrated during his time overseeing Cloud City, so it was entirely sensible to promote him to commander and have him lead the fighter squadron attack on the second Death Star alongside Admiral Akbar. Even characters seen to a lesser degree, like Mon Mothma, Wedge Antilles, Christ, love him or hate him, even the fucking Ewoks played a critical role in the grander scope of the rebellion. So it's just strange that Disney, at least in the context of the Ahsoka series, is all of a sudden pretending that force powers are something you need to make an actual impact or influence positive change. But I guess it is consistent with much of the backwards messaging coming out of the latest Disney productions. Star Wars was a franchise that once inspired audiences by demonstrating that everyone is inherently unique, and we should proudly embrace our individual talents while working together to strive for what is best. But I guess now the message is that who you are as an individual doesn't matter. It's not worth embracing, because anybody can become whatever they want regardless of it actually being physically possible or not. I guess it sounds nice enough, but the bottom line is this kind of lesson is just unreasonable and sets people up for a lifetime of failure and disappointment. Anyways, before I wrap up, let's play around with a little hypothetical scenario. Personally, I have no fucking clue why all of a sudden an established character like Sabine Wren would need to be able to use the Force, of course, outside of the show's plot demanding it. Maybe it was a result of overbearing studio executives who are almost entirely out of touch with their audience. Perhaps it was due to the writers letting their overinflated egos guide their decision making instead of logic and common sense. Frankly, I won't begin to speculate because it just simply isn't worth it. What I do know is that if it was up to me and I was tasked with retconning Sabine to be force sensitive, I would have gone about it in an entirely different manner. In about 5 minutes of brainstorming, I came up with an idea that, while still being far from perfect, would have caused significantly less damage to the overall Star Wars canon. In this situation, the biggest obstacle to overcome is the inherently problematic nature of retcons, as they can create a variety of continuity issues amongst the previously established material. Because of this, I would have opted to retcon the character as opposed to the Force itself, simply for the sake of proactive damage control. This way, any inconsistencies created would at least be limited to the individual character, as opposed to creating this ripple effect which now undermines the entire canon given how instrumental the Force is to Star Wars. Sabine Wren, of course, is of the Mandalorian House Wren, which to my understanding was closely aligned with House Vizsla throughout history. Because of this, it is likely that throughout their several hundred years of close interaction, there would be some natural intermingling between the two houses, which would result in a mixing of the bloodlines. One of the most renowned members of House Vizsla was Tar Vizsla, a Force-sensitive Mandalorian who was inducted into the Jedi Order, trained in the ways of the Force, and of course, most famously, the one who created the Darksaber. With the natural mixing of the Wren and Vizsla bloodlines, it's entirely plausible within the existing Star Wars canon that Sabine Wren would actually be an indirect descendant of Tar Vizsla himself, and could have inherited his Force sensitivity. Given that Hui Yang is over 20,000 years old, maybe he could have some kind of historical record of this and be able to connect the dots while providing the exposition. Some further effort, of course, is required to fill in the holes here, but that part's relatively easy. Perhaps Force sensitivity is just like other genetic traits and can possibly skip entire generations before resurfacing in their later descendants. This concept was actually used in the expanded universe and done so quite effectively in the case of Revan and Bastila Shan's direct descendants. Their firstborn child, Vaynor, was born without Force sensitivity, despite his parents being two of the most powerful Jedi at the time. So as a result, he pursued a career in politics rather than joining the Jedi Order. Multiple generations later, Satele Shan was born with Force sensitivity and would go on to become the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. Her son Theron once again did not inherit this trait, however, and instead became one of the top agents in the Republic Strategic Information Service. Quick shout out to Drew Karpyshyn here because Theron's story in the Old Republic Annihilation is phenomenal and incredibly underappreciated. The trickiest part in all this would be explaining why Sabine's Force abilities remained dormant until adulthood, and what happened to trigger them at this point. I would have liked to see Sabine's emotional trauma and her persistent fear of never seeing Ezra again to be the catalyst which spurs her initial connection to the Force, drawing her to the dark side as opposed to the light side for obvious reasons. This could have given both her and Ahsoka's characters more of an emotional arc as they struggle to prevent her complete fall to the dark side through Baylan Skoll's manipulations. Like I said, the concept is far from perfect, but it's a much more polishable turd than the one that was actually shat out for the Ahsoka series, and at least it doesn't fuck everything up across the entirety of the Star Wars universe. At the end of the day, retcons just don't often sit well with people, and for entirely valid reasons. Because of this, they must be handled very carefully and strategically. That is something that Disney and its writing staff do not seem willing, let alone capable of doing. Even when George Lucas himself made a relatively small change to the overall concept of the Force through the introduction of midichlorians, the reception was almost entirely negative. So the fact that Disney thinks that they can just now change one of the most fundamental aspects of the Force with such a lazy and flimsy explanation really speaks to the sheer depth of their inherent hubris. They're an organization that operates without a lick of respect for the franchise they paid so much money to acquire, let alone respect for their audience and viewers. They collectively celebrate their own failures, showing no shame or remorse as they bludgeon one of the most successful franchises in the history of entertainment nearly to death through terrible writing and execution. At this point, it really shouldn't be surprising that both the frequency and the magnitude of these retcons are increasing dramatically. The creative minds at Disney seem to be desperate to demonstrate how incapable they are of understanding and appreciating the established canon, let alone creating new and exciting stories within it. I'd never imagined that I would get to the point where I would have to ask this, but is all hope truly lost for Star Wars at this point? Is there even a remote chance that this gets turned around while still under the creative control of a company like Disney? Or is there just too much damage done and too many people alienated for the franchise to ever be financially viable anymore? Personally, I don't have a whole lot of faith left at this stage in the game because, like they say, play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, subscribe, or comment with your thoughts, but regardless, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.